Hello, we are back for another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. This is another episode in our Dad series, and episode 50. And we talked to Howard Hochhalter. He was an atheist, joined CC, became an astronomer, and his search of the stars led him to Christ. And you will not want to miss this story. Astronomy is one of the parts of the quadrivium, and it's something that we don't necessarily talk a lot about, but it's amazing to hear a story. You don't want to miss this episode or any episode in the month of June as we talk to Classical Conversations dads and hear what they are doing to impact the world for Christ. Now let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is Howard Hochhalter. Howard is a NASA Solar System Ambassador, Director of the Planetarium in the Hollow of Venice in Venice, Florida, and the former Planetarium Director at the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature in Florida, and I think we're going to talk a lot about that. He's a homeschool dad with Classical Conversations. He's a U.S. Marine, and his interest in astronomy was ignited when he took a chance visit to a local planetarium. And since then, he has dedicated his career to astronomy, studying and teaching the wonders of the universe. And for those who don't know, astronomy is actually part of the 7 liberal arts. It's part of the quadrivium. Howard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, how does one go from being a Marine to getting involved in astronomy? I'd love to hear about how that transition happened.
That's like asking how do you get from A to Z. It's through a lot of other letters, that's for sure. I had a sort of a meandering career path. I've worn many hats, and for many years, I worked in the hospitality industry. I was a bartender. You know, when you drive a 26-ton armored vehicle, your skill set doesn't necessarily immediately translate over to the civilian world. And so, it was an easy place to jump in, and it allowed me to integrate myself and pursue something that was very important to me at the time, which was world travel. And I was able to take that skill in an unexpected way, be able to take that and go to other places and still find employment. It brought me back to the States after having lived overseas for a while. Because I separated from the service in '93.
Okay.
And then so there was a big gap there, and that was spent largely working in the hospitality trade. I lived in Australia for about 5 years. I was in California for a little while, in Virginia, before I came back down to Florida. And of course, what did I do when I came down to Florida? Transitioned to a new place, went straight back into bartending. It was a easy way to kind of transition, but then. As you mentioned, it was a chance visit that kind of changed everything. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but it was a first date with my future wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So your first date with your future wife, you take her to the planetarium.
She takes me.
She takes you to the planetarium. Okay. Well, I was going to say, that's a pretty romantic first date. So I was going to say, good job there. But I don't know if you're letting your wife pick your dates.
Well, I think she was appealing to my intellectual curiosity. She knew that I had grown up in Washington, D.C., outside in the North Virginia area. And so I was a constant guest of the Smithsonian, the Air and Space Museum. And in early conversations, I had expressed an interest in space. And I thought it probably just popped up in conversation. My wife is a very thoughtful person, so she pays attention to little things. And to give you an example, for years, I thought these telescope catalogs just suddenly arrived from God, so to speak, just out of the blue. And for years, I believed that that's kind of what helped drive my interest in astronomy, was these catalogs that randomly showed up. No, that my wife arranged for that. And I didn't know that until years later.
Now, you're a bartender, and of course, that doesn't mean you can't be a Christian and bartend by any means, but you weren't saved when you went on that first date, and she wasn't either.
No. We were both moving in a different direction, and we were very simpatico in our lack of belief. We had an equal amount of lack of belief, but we had an equal amount of scaffolding and moral structure there that we were very compatible with one another in regular society. We had a lot of what we would refer to at the time as Christian friends.
Yeah.
But
to live in a moral lifestyle, but not seeking after the Lord.
I wasn't even openly acknowledging that. We were oblivious to that.
And now, one of the things that they tell me you do, you're a NASA Solar System Ambassador. What does that look like?
So it's a volunteer program, and I'll give you sort of my version of this, is that it's largely driven by, it's a program that's built up of a lot of people that are just like me, very passionate about astronomy, about space exploration, space science, earth sciences, and in particular with a special bent towards NASA programs and, the efforts that NASA does. It's an effort for NASA to communicate what they're doing to the public, to always keep them informed and relevant of what their tax dollars are paying for, right? And so, and we don't. It's like kind of like having to sell gold. You don't have to put a positive spin on it. It's glamorous stuff. I think it's, some of it gets into the nitty gritty of the science, and there's a lot of hard to understand imagery and, weird graphs. And sometimes if you're not really paying attention, it's hard to see some of the value in it. But, and that's why, the SSA program is there. We're partnered with NASA and JPL, and we go out and we kind of help explain what the programs are about, in particular James Webb, some of the other bigger missions that are built on some of the deeper technologies that don't necessarily get all of the fanfare in the public venue. So we go out and kind of help spread the word and act like sort of scientific apostles, for NASA, so to speak, and what we're doing for the United States.
Yeah, my two oldest and I just went down to Florida and spent the night at the center and slept under, I think, the Apollo. It was really cool. Cool experience. Was it
indoors or outdoors?
Indoors.
Yeah, I think you're looking at those. I think I know what part you're talking about. That's an awesome room. It makes you feel very small.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. So, Christians kind of maybe now they think astronomy, astrology, and, astrology bad, and maybe even ignore the stars. But it's part of the quadrivium. It's part of the 7 liberal arts. And it's something that the Lord used to really draw you to him. But before all that, my understanding is some of your Christian friends convinced you to homeschool and join classical conversations. What was that like, deciding to join a classical Christian community when you didn't have care about the middle part?
I love to talk about this because in hindsight, it always speaks back to how I found that God was wrapping himself around us, even when we weren't believers. And so I can't help but kind of cut to that part of the story. But I was working at the museum. I'm working in the planetarium, and there's a family that comes in, a young woman and some very young boys, and the oldest one was 7. And I can't remember what show they watched, but he come out and he asked me, and in a very articulate way. I'm a secular-minded person now, so he says to me, "Could you explain to me the difference between a star, the mass of a star that will become a white dwarf versus one that will become a supernova and a black hole?" I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but to hear this from a 7-year-old, it stopped me in my tracks, because he was using words to articulate what was, at that point, I thought, a very complex idea that not a lot of people understood. And so I asked him, I said, "What school do you go to?" And he said, I homeschool. And I was baffled by this, because the idea of homeschooling just wasn't on my radar at the time. And so I said, I want to meet your mother. And she came around and we talked, and we met. They were a Christian family. They lived on a boat. They sold their house. They lived on a sailboat, and they just sailed around Florida, and they were classically educating their kids. Now, they weren't in classical conversations. They took a very classical approach to education, and they were doing it in a biblical way. And I was just amazed at the product never mind the methodology, right? This little
Right.
boy is asking me about black holes, and he's 7 years old. And that, in my mind, I was blown away. So I talked to my wife. She'd already had an interest in educating, and we had talked about something like this. And this really encouraged us. I introduced her to my wife. We have developed a lifelong friendship. We're still friends with her today. Her children have all grown up. It's amazing now to see, who they've become. And they really encouraged us. And that's what triggered the interest in homeschooling. But it was, again, another one of our very close Christian friends that were very close to us. And in other words, this is another accident. I call it an accident. These fateful moments where it's clearly God has been wrapping himself around us. My wife's curiosity, here you realize my curiosity led me to the museum. Her curiosity led her to music. And her music teacher is, again, now one of our lifelong friends. And her music teacher, who taught her how to play the violin, she pursued this as an adult on her own. She just decided she wanted to play the violin. And so she is in class with potentially with younger kids. But she's a Christian, and she's homeschooling her kids, and she introduces us to classical conversations. And there's this chapter in our local community that is just, they used to jokingly say they're the Tiger Moms of Sarasota, that they're really, very, very engaged in their children's learning. And if you're an achiever and you want to be, get ahead, you want to get in this group. There was a waiting list to get in there. I think it was a 2-year waiting list. Wow. And so we waited. My oldest was still just a baby at the time, so, very young. And so my wife had begun with the basic principles. We started teaching her sign language before she could speak. And I remember she could communicate the moon and stars in sign language before she could speak. But it's going to come back on, so I'm sure it's going to still be a longer story. But it's been a remarkable experience, and we decided that a Christian homeschooling co-op was the ideal choice for us because the people in it made us feel so welcome. My wife was convinced. She said we had come from a world where we thought Christians are a little bit too tight, a little bit too rigid, and if my wife were sitting here in the interview, she would tell you, she discovered all on her own without any influence from me. It is the exact opposite in the real world. And that, all of her friends that she thought were so enlightened and so accommodating were actually very rigid and very limited in their outlook. And it was her Christian friends that just very slowly through osmosis brought her over.
Now, at this time, you were working at the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature in Florida. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did they give you a special project to do?
Yes, they. So at the time I was the planetarium manager, and the director of the planetarium, he and I, again, we're both atheists, and he asked me, because we have a large Christian community, so there's an interest in a program called the Star of Bethlehem.
Star of Bethlehem, and that's the star that was allegedly over Bethlehem that the Magi followed. Mm-hmm. To go worship Jesus.
Right. These broad strokes of history that we understand almost put it into sort of a legendary, impossible, miraculous status, right? And when you hear these things, it's like hearing about a man who's 25 feet tall, swings an axe, and has a big blue ox for a pet, right? And so it stretches the imagination. And so that's what piqued my curiosity. And I said, okay, yeah, I'd really like to explore this in a forensic way. Is there really something that really was here? I'd be happy to do the show. Because it was a voluntary basis, and so I dove into it. And in my quest to understand science, I discovered how to learn something. It's like saying once you discovered there's bones in the ground, you figure out how to dig them out, right? And so you how to find information and learn things. And so in the quest to understand science, I figured out how to research, and I started to do my research on the star, and there's an enormous amount of history behind it, and it's only a few layers below the surface. If you're really curious, there's a lot of very specific information. But I think what was happening at the time, I lived it's a very interesting period, is that when software really started to transform the way people understood information. Like before, 25, 30 years ago, there was no software out there that would very easily replicate the sky that was commercially available for anyone. And so it was all of the painstaking predictions and motions of the planets and stars have to be done by hand. And that just boggles the mind to think that they were able to do that to some degree. But with software, it makes it much more expedient. And so I was able to take these dates, punch them in, find out that there really were incredible things that happened. And so you find, it's like finding out there wasn't really a guy that was 20 feet tall that swung an axe and had a big blue ox. And then you go and research.
Paul Bunyan.
Well, then you find out there really was this guy named Paul Bunyan, and he was inordinately tall. He was a lumberjack, and he had this big ox that had this blackish blue color. And you, oh my God, there's truth to this. And it's mind-boggling. Yeah. And I speak in a comical way about, Paul Bunyan, but the star is real. The incidents behind them are real. And the consequences that they had on the people who were looking at them were real. And that's what I discovered. And to me, those were like finding azimuth points on like shooting an azimuth to a star when you're out in the open ocean. It's a piece of a truth. And when you do that 3 times, it gives you this thing called your location, right? And if the more you do it, the more accurate your result is. And what I found was taking random facts, random history, random biblical prophecy. But when you take the context of those 3 things, historical, astronomical, and then biblical prophecy as sort of shooting azimuths, they all report back a truth. And that's what I discovered over time.
So to plug the quadrivium real quick, music, which is something that your wife picked up as an adult, is almost math in motion. And for astronomy, it's kind of history over time. It's math in time. And so you're able to, the path of the stars can reveal history to us, right? It's we know when Halley's Comet's coming again. And we know when it came last time. And so you can go and really sync up history and time, place, based on study of astronomy. And that's what happened.
I'm going to use your metaphor because it's kind of how I'd like to describe it. It used to be kind of a funny way for me, but historical facts and these data points, seemingly random, it sounds like you're uncovering a piece of noise at a moment in time. It's just this random note at a moment in time. And another moment in time, another random note. But if you put them all into context, what I see as I look at the whole picture is I hear da 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 da, and how can that not be the sign of something? There's this truth, and I'm equating it to something somewhat comical. But if you hear shave and a haircut 2 bits, that's not an accident. Music is not accidental noise, and so it is made of noise, but there's this emergent quality that comes out of it we call music, and that's what appeals to us. And I think that's what, to use your metaphor, I look at the Star of Bethlehem and the story behind it, all 3 aspects layered together, and I see a beautiful piece of music.
So the Star of Bethlehem, like how are you able to go back in history in time? You said we've got technology now. You can kind of see what the sky would have looked like over Bethlehem. But what was it? What did the Bible say it was supposed to look like in that first time, or as you're researching it and kind of dialing it in, what did you see in the computer generation?
So when I first read the histories, this actually almost destroyed the show. I shouldn't say destroyed the show, but it tickled my secular mind because I went, ha! This is all nonsense. Because when I took the dates and I punched them all in, nothing showed up. Nothing even close. I was expecting something partially close. I go, oh, okay, if you stretch that a little bit, maybe I could see that. That's what I was expecting. It didn't even come close. And I thought, this is nonsense. And I started to pull back from my curiosity about the show. But what I discovered as I dug a little bit deeper, because I thought maybe I was making a mistake, and I can't walk away from this. If I made a mistake, I got to double check this. So what I found out was, and it became immediately obvious to me afterwards, I said, oh, duh. The Gregorian calendar doesn't account for a year 0. It's just 1 BC, 180. There's no year 0. But in numerical integers, there is a 0. That's essential. And so in an astronomical calendar, there is what we call year 1. Then there's a year 0. And then there's -1 or 1 BC. And so by adding that 0, that shifted all the dates. And so when I was using the software, which runs with numerical integers, I would punch in June 17th, 2 BC, but it was showing me June 17th, 3 BC. And it kind of pushed it back. So you'd have to sort of subtract one. So I would punch in June 17th, 1 BC, and I would get June 17th, 2 BC. And once I changed the date by subtracting for adding that, accounting for that extra integer, then everything popped into place. And then that wowed me. Even as a secular guy, I still wasn't crossed over yet, but I went, oh, well, that's okay. I can see how people would accept this and believe that this is, something in the sky and it's prophetic, then my secular mind saying that doesn't mean it is, but,
Sure.
that was.
What is it in the sky? Like, I've Googled it.
Mm-hmm.
it, but for those who haven't, like, can you just describe what you see in the sky over Bethlehem at that time?
Well, it really depends on when you're specifically looking. But if you're looking from Babylon, when most of the story of the Magi actually that's important takes place is when they're back east, because they are seeing the things that are telling them what's happening. When they arrive, it's already happened, right? And so on their way there, this is the phenomenal part about this, is that there's deep, enormous meaning. And this is not an accidental object that appears in the sky. It was like watching the North American or the continental plates of the planet shift together. Over time, they were watching these objects, and the objects in question are the planets, the things that move in the sky. I like to call them, if the stars are like playing cards, well, then the planets are like face cards. They have special value assigned to them, and they move in a particular way. And the value that's assigned to them means something. Now, you began this part with saying a lot of Christians say we don't pay attention to the stars. And the secular person, I could say, well, the stars are more like the gears of a clock. The clock is oblivious to what midnight means. Midnight only means someone who's looking at the clock. And that's what I believe that God understands, is that he used the mechanisms like a clock to tell us something, because he knew people were looking, people were paying attention. And there was symbolism in the sky that meant something to the Magi. And it is all interconnected, because if you look at who the Magi were, well, they were the Chaldeans, and these are the Babylonians that destroyed the house of Judah and took the the Jews into captivity, and took with them Daniel, who spurred the prophecy that led to the Magi showing up. It's sort of
I'm glad you went there, because when I heard your story, I went back and started reading Daniel again about his life. And it's like, so God prepared, hundreds, thousands of years ago, because Daniel became head of the Magi after predicting, being able to tell the stories. The Babylonians raided the temple and took all the gold and silver and all the things. And I don't think they brought $2 billion worth of gold to Jesus, but they did bring frankincense and myrrh and some gold. There was certainly, there's a lot of symbolism that's tied into that. And, there's another interesting part, if you really want to analyze this in a logical way. This is sort of the mixture of faith and science here, is that my thinking is there was probably a lot more than 3 Magi. I don't know what a lot mean, but to the Magi of the East, I would liken it to this. How many Americans are going to make an effort to go see the solar eclipse in 2024? And we know it's coming. And the Magi, they knew what was coming. And so when they saw it happening, I would imagine anyone that could have gone would have gone. When you consider who Daniel was to the Magi themselves, he was their greatest prophetic member, and he was a Jew. He wasn't a Babylonian. Which is awesome if you think about it as a Gentile. My wife's half Jewish, but even from the beginning, God had a plan.
Yes.
For all of humanity. Mm-hmm. And those Magi had been faithful for significantly more generations than other people had been faithful, waiting for the sign.
There's an interesting connection, the Chaldeans that the Magi are from, the Magi order. These Chaldeans that sort of spawned the Babylonians, they're all kind of one and the same. The Chaldeans and Abraham share a place of origin. They're from Ur I may be saying that incorrectly. Ur. I'm learning all of this, of course, because as a new Christian, I still say the names incorrectly. I don't know if I say Habakkuk right. I struggle with names, but I love reading the stories. I'm still sort of familiarizing myself with them.
So the computer screen shows this awesome image to you, and boom, Christian right then, or
no?
What's going on? Do you go rush home and show it to your wife? Because she's not a Christian yet either, is she?
So this is the interesting thing. My wife and I were both creeping towards Christianity, and we weren't telling each other.
Okay.
She was doing it. She'd been doing it for 2 years before me through CC. We had both agreed at the very beginning when we started homeschooling and doing CC. This is a conscious decision. And I'm a secular-minded guy, and I said, I do not want to raise my children to be atheists. It was, to me, I made a choice, and I wanted them to make a choice, which meant that they had to be raised in an environment where I thought it was important for me to have the moral stability that I think is important in a society. And I didn't know of any other way to get that except Judeo-Christian teaching. So to me, this was like saying, my children need to go to a dentist. I don't know anything about dental care, so I'm going to send them to a dentist. Yeah. And so, we wanted to be part of the CC community. We loved that part was welcoming to me. But if my children were curious, I would definitely tell them things that I know. If they didn't want to believe, I wouldn't compel them to believe. That was the choice that my wife and I made when we began. So as we move forward, lo and behold, it's my wife that starts to creep towards Christianity. For me, I think I held out in force of habit and intellectual stubbornness. There was a friend of ours in our CC community. She's one of our teachers. She's one of the tutors. When she came to one of my first, I still hear her voice in my head when they said she
thinking the timeline.
Well, that too. That never goes away. But she made a comment because nobody knew I was an atheist. And when they came to the show and they watched the show, they were blown away. But it was like hearing the virtues of American democracy being sold to you by Joseph Stalin. It almost like, what? How can this guy celebrate this story so well? And he's an atheist? Did he? And this is what our friend said. She goes, did he listen to himself in this show? And so there was I kept seeing everything as impressive. Yeah, but that's not quite it. And this is the thing I didn't realize. I had been triangulating, and I had been getting this grid coordinate, so to speak. And I didn't recognize it for the truth yet. But it was slowly dawning on me. My crossover actually came where, in a moment of despair, I begged for help. This is what I mean, but I think I had been circling around God for a while now. My arms are crossed and I was looking up in the air, pretending like I didn't know he was there, but I was circling around because I was aware. And in the course of something that was very important to me, a project I was working on for the planetarium. In fact, it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 15 mission, which has some very compelling reasons for me to be involved in. And I was struggling to fix something that almost ruined my show. And I could spend hours just talking about that little drama, but to make this succinct, I asked for help, not expecting to get it because I was so desperate. And about 30 seconds later, the answer was right in front of me. And it was almost like a daze for me because I think about this, I felt compelled to call, I called Joy Irwin. The show was about the Apollo 15 mission, and it was her father, Jim Irwin, who was the lunar module pilot for Apollo 15. And I was doing the show to honor the mission, the crew, and her father. And he was an evangelical. There's a Bible left on the moon that was his. And he's the only astronaut that quoted the Bible on the moon. And Joy and the entire Irwin family, Christian friends of ours, they were those folks that I said were God closed ranks around us before I ever became a Christian. And she was the first person I called immediately, and I said, I've changed. My view is different now. And it was that moment. And then, it's kind of like once the doors open, the ball has been accelerating. And I think somewhere along the line, I realized that I passed my wife And that's when we sort of realized, wow, we're really both immersed in our faith now, and we didn't really communicate this to one another. We both sort of rounded the corner and ran into each other.
Wow. So you call his daughter, talk to her, tell her no, and then you go home, and are you like scared to tell your wife, or has she already kind of revealed these things, or you're excited to tell her? What was that like?
At this point, I had already known that we're kind of leaning in that direction. She is. Again, it's like, I describe it as like watching the sun come up. It doesn't just all of a sudden boop, pop up in the sky. There's this slow creeping moment, and you go, well, what moment did you know the sun was coming up? I think I knew it before it was there. But there is that moment when you actually see the sun, because you take your eyes off for a moment, and then it is there. And that's kind of, I think for me, how it was, and that it like cement, it was liquid one moment, and then it was solid the next. And I don't remember the transition, except to say that it was during this period. And I was working on the Star of Bethlehem over 10 years. And every year I did it, because I wanted the guests to return, I always thought, I have to make it better. And the only way I could make it better was to learn more. And so I dove deeper and deeper. And I will say this, there was a time when I couldn't even say the word God. I felt very disingenuous when I said it, because I was a secular person. And so I was trying to speak to repeat the prophetic words of the prophets, to say God in a passionate way. And it was very difficult for me as a secular person. This last Star at Bethlehem, of course, is the first one I ever did as a Christian, and full wholehearted Christian. And I have no difficulty saying God now. None at all.
Well, tell us now about your family. How many children do you have? Like, are you teaching them astronomy? Is that a passion that they hold as well, or something that they have their own passions that you're cultivating as a homeschooling dad?
So here's another interesting little tidbit, is that I have 4 children with my wife, Kristen, and I have my oldest daughter is 16. Stella is 14. Lyra is 12. She's about to turn 13 this month. And Tycho just turned 8. And if you follow their names, they're all named after astronomical phenomenon, constellations, and astronomers. But another gift from God is that I discovered a 5th child that I did not know about. And through my sister, so this is another long story. I won't go too deeply into this, but my father never knew who his father was. And, there's this generational curse that's been afflicting our family that has devastated us for multiple generations, where fathers and sons were not connected. And my father didn't know his father. And I didn't even know my father was adopted until very nearly the end of his life. And that made me see that my life and what my understanding of my life was very different than what I thought it was. And so there was this issue about, I felt like a man with no history, because I didn't know who my real grandfather was. My dad didn't know who his grandfather was. My sister did a DNA test in the quest to sort of search out our paternal history. And she hit the jackpot. We found out who we really are. We have an enormous and rich history throughout American colonial history. But more importantly, we found out who my grandfather is. But when we cast that DNA net out there, I found out that at the time, he was a 28, just about to turn 29-year-old son who was living the exact same life that my father did, which incidentally was very similar to my life. He's my doppelganger. His likes, his dislikes, very similar to mine. He served in the military just like I did.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some uncanny similarities. And I mean, it doesn't seem uncanny to me. I'm like, of course, he's my son.
Sure.
But the gift is that before I became a Christian, and this is the connection, this is another one of the reasons why I could say I saw the light, but I didn't know the sun was coming. Because before
the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness did not understand it.
I was in it and I didn't understand it. That's for sure. When I discovered my son, When they found out, that in itself is a story. When I found out and I learned that I had a son I did not know about, I had to know him immediately. I couldn't wait. And so my wife found him on Facebook, and we messaged him immediately, and I identified who I was. And I thought, well, I'm getting emotional thinking about it.
Yeah. I'm getting emotional hearing about it.
I said to my wife, well, we sent the message. Now we'll wait and see. And I don't go on Facebook much, so I don't know if it still does this, but it says his name is David, and it says David is replying. And I went, he's replying back. Oh my God, right now. And it took a couple of minutes, and then his reply back came. He gave me his phone number, and then we immediately talked. And we talked for 3.5 hours. And I remember I fell to my knees. And I looked to my wife. And I said, I don't know who to thank for this. In my heart, I knew. That's why I said it the way that I did. My secular mind didn't know how to process that. Because the discovery of my son healed a lot of wounds on many different levels. And my life has been nothing but a gift. And I see that now.
Yeah, that is amazing. So this was all before you were a Christian, and then
yes,
just the Lord shining his light and love on you. It's a very compelling and amazing story. It just really brings to light how much he loves all of us. And of course, you think about him sending his son to die for us, and you learn about that if you go to Sunday school or grow in a Christian home growing up. But I think it makes it much more tangible when we hear, from someone now, just how that manifests itself, 2,000 years later. What are you excited about now? I'm assuming that you and him have reconciled and know each other and spend time, and your children are getting ready for in high school and getting ready for college and things like that. But what are the things that you're doing now in astronomy? What are you excited about? What are those things that you see that are going to continue to reveal his glory to us? Because it's always so amazing. Every year you read multiple things. Science discovers this. It's like, well, that's in the Bible. Christians have known about this forever. Science is just catching up. So what are some things you see that are exciting you?
Yes. So I love the things that are hard to validate. It's like the invisible man that leaves footprints on the beach. One can argue that he isn't there, and then one can argue that he is. And those kind of arguments I find the most fascinating. And so with that, it's dark matter, dark energy, those astrophysical concepts that are revealing something to us in one way and hiding in another, that make them extremely difficult to understand and, of course, test. There's something undeniable about them, in spite of the lack of data on them. And that's what, it sparks my curiosity. It's like, I imagine if, you were looking at hieroglyphics and you didn't have the Rosetta Stone, you'd be staring at it thinking, this means something. This means something. I don't know what it is. And then when the Rosetta Stone comes, you're very thankful. And so we're looking at physical hieroglyphics up there. There's a metaphor I use for this because I understand now from a secular mind. I like to describe the universe as it's an apple pie. And we, as a secular person, we explore life, we taste life, and I use it as an apple pie because it's a pleasant, awesome thing. But to the secular-minded person, to someone like me, 5 years ago, we're trying to break down the molecular structure of the apple pie. We're breaking down the number of atoms that are present in each molecule and how the molecules are bonded together to make something sweet, and how our taste buds work that process this sweetness. And they can tell you everything that they understand about the apple pie, and almost nothing they say about that apple pie is not false. But what they don't understand, they don't believe in the baker.
Yeah.
And so the thing to remember is that, what I want to tell my Christian brothers and sisters now is that there's a message in science that I think sometimes it's barbed. It makes it seem like this thing that is important for you to know forces you to give up something that's too important to you, meaning that science tends to say or suggests in the way that it's delivered by the people who teach it is that it suggests there isn't a God. And I would say it does nothing of the sort. And that's just an interpretation that they're giving themselves. And what the injustice that they do is that they create a mistrust for the very reality of the pie. We know there's a baker. I believe there's a baker. But I think that understanding what is in the pie is important to understanding what the gift is. And I think that, if you can see past some of the nonsense there, like for instance, I watch some of the science shows with my kids now, especially with a Christian mind. I go, okay, so what they're saying here is this. Ignore this part here, but this is the part that they're saying that's important. And that's what you have to do a lot of. It's like watching the news or anything on the internet today. Is you gotta cut away the nonsense to get to the real stuff. And science is no different because they're humans.
All right, now I've tried to reach out to Elon Musk and see if we could make Classical Conversations the official curriculum of Mars in case he goes there. But would you ever space travel? Do you have a dream of going up in space if the Lord allows it on your time on Earth, or do you like watching from here on the ground?
You're catching me at the cusp. So yesterday I would have jumped out of an airplane. Tomorrow I probably won't. And so somewhere in between, I'm getting to that point where I'm thankful to just have the ground under my feet and walk around and feel the breeze. I don't need to jump out of an airplane to create a sense of a breeze, So I can live vicariously through other people. But if I could, say, go to Mars, like going to Boca or something, get on, then I would go in a heartbeat.
Couple hour trip, not a couple year trip.
I'm not interested in risking my hide anymore. And that I don't know if it's sad or good, but that change has probably occurred just over the last couple of years, because I remember answering this question a few years ago and I said, oh, in a heartbeat. I think I joke with my wife. My wife is a mountain climber and her dream was always to climb Mount Everest. And I said, I'll go to Mount Everest when they have an escalator that goes to the top. Then we can all enjoy it. And she did not like that picture.
There's a lot of inspired mountain climbers that they have their bones on Mount Everest.
No, I've seen.
I'm with you.
I've watched enough documentaries with her about it. I said, I can live vicariously through the efforts of others. I have some other pursuits that are a little bit more benign and very satisfying.
Wonderful. Well, Howard, just thank you so much for coming on the show today. If people are interested in learning more about the Star of Bethlehem, the work you're doing, what's the best way to connect with you and learn more about astronomy and how it does point to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ?
Well, the most direct outlet to that, and I hadn't even considered this, is because I'm not really sort of a content creator, but I'm beginning, and I think you've seen I created a video that sort of translates in a visual way what I had written about the Star of Bethlehem. And I'll close this out really quickly. I said, we did one presentation in the church with the Star of Bethlehem, and I felt like I was Lewis and Clark. I traveled across the United States and I came back and I tried to tell everyone I experienced everything in one night. And it was a 2.5-hour presentation, and I realized I really, really, really pushed it. And so what I try to do is condense it to the most important points. So it's a 16.5-minute video, but it really hits the highlights and it gives my testimony, but it also connects to the broad strokes that really are so compelling and as part of the story. And then my goal is to continue to tell that story and the other aspects that I find are validated through the sky. Information about the sky. Some people used to ask me, "Did you see anything in the sky when on the date of crucifixion?" And I I can't validate that directly. Nothing in the sky. But what I can say is there are ways to validate the crucifixion through prophecy, and what prophecy suggests can be validated in the sky. And that's why my next video is going to explain that. I'm going to say when I think Jesus was born.
Oh, so where can they get that video?
Oh, that will be, it's currently, I have it. It's on YouTube? Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's HRH Astro. That's my channel name. It's my name, Howard Richard Hochhalter. Some people say HRH, was he His Royal Highness? And those are my initials. Yeah.
HRH
Astro.
Astro, ASTRO.
Correct.
And you can find it on YouTube. Awesome. Well, when I heard your story when I was at a forum in Florida, I really wanted to share it with our audience. Our mission is to know God and to make him known. And, we're always blessed whenever we're a small part of anyone's journey to eternal life. And so, Howard, thank you so much for really making the quadrivium come to life and sharing your story with us today. I know it's going to really pique a lot of people's interest.
Thank you for your time.
Now let's practice the 15 tools of classical learning together with some current events. And today we're going to talk a little bit about UFOs, unidentified flying objects, as we called them growing up. And a whistleblower says that the Pentagon has a secret government program that is rescuing crashed UFOs and reverse engineering their technology. And this is super interesting, very controversial, obviously. We do know that there's billions, if not trillions of dollars missing out of the Pentagon budget. So maybe this is where it's going. But let's practice those 15 tools together. The first one is attending and knowing the difference. So we grew up calling them UFOs, but the Air Force now calls them UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And it's a government-created phrase, but basically they're not saying that they're necessarily flying objects, but they're unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is really interesting. One of the 5 common topics of dialectic is relationships. And there's these flying orbs that have been being seen more and more frequently recently. And the only reason I know a little bit about this topic is one of our friends who's in classical conversations. You may know that we live near a very large military base here. He's actually getting his PhD in alien phenomenon. And he's been telling me all about these orbs and different things that are going on at the same time. So that was maybe a month ago. He was telling me all about that. And then this whistleblower comes out and talks about this secret government program. So very interesting to me. And then in the 5 canons of rhetoric, the tool of memory and just reminding ourselves what we know to be true. And in Genesis 6, it says, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they choose." So we do know, at least from the Bible, that non-human entities have come to the earth in the past. And of course, there's the angels and the demons and everything going on. So angels, demons, or aliens, I don't know, but it's super interesting to hear about a study that my friend is doing to get a degree that the government's paying for, and to see news related to it shortly after he told me a little bit about his research. So continue to question everything and use the 15 tools of learning to really dive down and see what could be true and what could not be true. Thanks for practicing the 15 tools of learning with me on refining rhetoric. But if you want to dive even deeper, get practical advice on how to assess your students' learning more effectively, and get hands-on guidance, we have a service called the Classical Learning Cohort. CC mom, who just went through it, named Bethany, just said it helped her become a better communicator, listener, assessor, and teacher in her home with her girls. And by signing up for this cohort, the same thing can happen with you. It meets online 6 times per semester in a small group with like-minded parents and a leader that's going to help you understand the classical model and gain confidence as that lead learner in your homeschool and in your local classical conversations community. They are guided by veteran homeschool parents, and in that cohort, you will learn and practice new skills such as giving and receiving assessment. You'll learn how to draw your student out into each lesson by applying exordium and developing new tools for reviewing. And finally, you'll learn to mentor and be a mentor with other homeschoolers from around the world. So whether you're CC parent, director, tutor, or other CC leader, and you're looking to grow in your classical education journey, join us at Classical Conversations /cohort. That's the classical learning cohort. You can sign up today at classicalconversations.com /cohort. And you can see that link in the show notes below. Now let's jump back in. Now let's talk about Tether and crypto and stable coins. And El Salvador's Bitcoin mining industry is backed by Tether, and Tether is a stable coin. And so we think about what is a stable coin. And if you think about Bitcoin, you can trade it back and forth, or you can trade it with other alternative coins. But what if you want it to come into US dollars, but don't necessarily want to take it out of the system or put it in a bank account? So that's why they invented Tether, which is considered a stable coin and is usually worth $1. Sometimes it's worth a little bit more or a little bit less, but it's a way of keeping your coins out of the USD, so you don't need a bank to hold them, but a way to get out of maybe a more volatile coin, such as any of the altcoins or Coinbase itself, as they go up and down all the time. And so why is this article important? Well, because if you think about a US dollar, right, that is backed comparatively, which is one of the 5 common topics of dialectic, by the full credit of the United States. Maybe there's some people call it the petrodollar or gold reserves, or just the force of the United States military, that we can expect a dollar to be worth $1, and it's not going to be very volatile. Obviously, we've seen a lot of inflation lately, so the value of the dollar has gone down, but we still walk into the store with $1, and we can expect to get $1's worth of goods, even if that amount has changed. Versus if you are in a USDT, how do they guarantee the value of $1 in theirs? And so as they've sold them, they have, when they gave their first USDT away, they collected $1. And so if somebody then sold it, then they could give that $1 back to them, in a sense. And as they've been collecting these dollars, they then go invest it and hopefully get a return so that they're able to operate their nonprofit or the business behind it and continue to grow it out, while making sure that the coin is still stable, that you can still trade in your $1 USDT for a real US dollar. And this could be a big issue if they are not liquid enough and suddenly everyone wants to sell their USDT, then the value would go down. So maybe they can only sell it for 90 cents or 80 cents or 70 cents. And we've seen that with some of these stable coins that didn't have enough value. And so that makes people really scared because they have the memory, which is one of the 5 canons of rhetoric, of their stable coin, which is supposed to stay worth $1, plus or minus 1% every once in a while, going down to 50 cents or 30 cents on the dollar when a liquidity event has occurred. And Tether wants to say that they have most of their funds in a liquid form, and that these investments that they made are fully collateralized and backed in case there is a liquidity event and they need to be able to give you a dollar, basically give you your dollar back for that. So that's something that's in the news, of course, as we see more and more things like the SEC suing Coinbase. People are getting nervous. But some people say when everyone else gets nervous, it's good to be greedy. And when people get greedy, start getting nervous. Definitely not financial advice, but we are in exciting times in crypto. And it'll be interesting to see if it goes up or down based on all of the news happening right now. I so enjoyed this conversation with Howard and just him sharing his heart and his journey from becoming an atheist to becoming a Christian through the study of astronomy and just the history that comes alive from the Bible when we can see the stars and how they're ordered. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please rate and review our podcast. We love your feedback. Please share this with a friend who could be encouraged. And be sure to tune in next week as we continue our conversation with classical education fathers and throughout the month of June. So we'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.